Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Down on the Watt Farm, a podcast about US Elite and Collegiate rowing. I'm Andrew. I am currently a card-carrying member of the Riverside Boat Club, but formerly of Tufts Rowing and Redwood Scullers. My likes include sculling, burgers, and Super Smash Bros. My dislikes include skim milk and the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Hi, I'm Skate. I currently row for Boston University. My likes include ice cream and erging, and my dislikes include fat-free ice cream.
Among other things. So to get things started, just a quick sort of rundown. We know the Indoor World Championships are ongoing as we speak, but just some thoughts on the move to Long Beach. We're in this now second year, I believe, of the World Championships being a thing for erging, and it started off with being a good thing, I think, for the Mid-Atlantic sprints especially, and just a really great way to get international talent out to the United States and some more exposure. But now with the move to Long Beach, it feels kind of deflated almost.
Yeah, so the entries are down a lot compared to last year with Mid-Atlantics. Mid-Atlantic saw a huge entry uptake last year versus Long Beach. The entries are really low, and some events don't have entries, or they have as few as 2 or 3. And
lightweight woman with only 3.
Yeah.
Shout out to our girl Caitlin Garagian for putting herself out there, and that's what I love to see when it comes to coxswains, is putting themselves on the line as much as the rowers do. But how has that affected Crash Bees?
Right. So Crash B, the entry went down last year, notably from Mid-Atlantics having the overlap with the racing. And this year, Crash B went down a ton. So Crash B actually left Aganis Arena, and they're competing out of the Track and Tennis Center. Entries were way lower. It was a really low-profile event. They didn't really have a call for volunteers because they didn't really need them. Really taking a toll.
A serious drop, I guess, from the high-profile nature of Crash Bees in 2017, when you had people like Angel Fournier Rodriguez and Elena Buryak just coming in, and these really high-powered star profiles just coming in. So I don't want to call it a letdown, because it's a historic event and a really great way to sort of punctuate the winter training season. But this year was just kind of sad. It felt like the conditions were worse. The times were slower. No seriously big names coming up. And honestly, kind of the same thing for Mid-Atlantics. I mean, we were just talking about that, but kind of a disappointment really for just for winter training in general. There's so little to look forward to on a yearly basis. And now that I'm not going to say that the move to Long Beach has killed anything, but there are rumors of Crash Bees just being canceled next year, just because there's not enough interest. And my question, though, as it always is why does anyone want to pay $42 to pull a 2K in really crappy conditions against people that you probably see on a regular basis anyway? And why would you want to do that? Why would you want to do Crash Bees?
Right. So when I was a junior, I always wanted to go to Crash Bees because if I pulled the right score, it was free, and I got a cool trip to Boston. So I got to erg with a lot of people who are really good on the ergs, and it was nice to see kind of how you stack up in that situation. But I think with Long Beach especially, the only teams you're really seeing is the US national team shows up. They put their whole force out there. And so that's kind of the only thing I would really want to go to see. Other than that, it's kind of like the only big change is accessibility for South American countries, and Mexico, Baja State. I
will say credit to Mike Tatey and Tom Terra, right? For sending the entire squad out there. It's a really great artificial way of increasing exposure and getting people to care about what's going on in Long Beach. But who cares? I feel bad for saying that, because there's a lot of really hardworking men and women out there across all kinds of categories. And you do still have star power. Elena Buryak's back at it again. I'm sure she probably just won again, maybe broke her world record again. But Ollie Ziedler's out there, and a couple of high-profile British rowers, if I'm not mistaken.
Some pretty well-known British rowers for the indoor circuit, certainly in the lightweight women.
Absolutely. And then back to Caitlin Garagian, who still shout out again, because I love it, but
I was entertained.
Absolutely.
She's been live on Instagram with her 2Ks for the last 3 weeks on the women's national team. She won an 807.7.
wow, that's better than some people I know who are quite a bit taller than she is. So, but it'll be interesting to see to actually get the breakdown of what the times are, because you don't often get that kind of insight into the physical fitness of any national team, just period. And so seeing the depth and breadth of what's going on in Oakland and what's going on in New Jersey is going to be really insightful and a good topic for next week when we actually get to check out the results.
Yeah, it certainly will be nice to know what those scores look like. But
and a good and maybe even just a good next step for Ollie Ziedler too. Someone who 18 months after starting is hitting the podium at the World Cup. What's he going to do now? Is he hitting the 530s as a 22-year-old, which I'm not going to, I won't say I'm upset about, but I am just a tiny bit jealous. Someone who has his own aspirations for the podium at the world stage, but we'll get to that later. So that's what we have for the elite material today. Moving on to collegiate rowing, which is I think probably what more people care about at this point in time, just with being with the immediacy or the proximity to what they're doing. How are we going to cover this in this podcast?
Right. So on the women's side, there's over 100 teams. So what we're looking at is kind of going by week to week, what the big events are, what the major races are, major drama, things that really stand out, things that really didn't happen. Mostly by division 1, 2, 3, and lightweight. And
then probably also working around conferences, right? Because it's hard when you think about the NCAA championships. There's at the D1 level 22 slots, but then more often than not, 8 of those slots go to the Ivy Leagues in some form or another. But it's all right. Maybe not all 8, but
it's about 6.
The Ivy League is still this. I didn't, correct me if I'm wrong, unless it's like Pac-12 or something. But the Ivy League has the most representation at the NCAA level, at least at the championship level.
Right. So that's where you're wrong. It's the Pac-12. The Pac-12 I think had 5 or 6 teams last year. Ivy League was second. Ivy League and Pac-12 definitely take the cake when it comes to getting the qualifiers, especially with the way the Ivy League works with qualifying with the varsity 8 versus qualifying with the full team. So when we get to May, we're looking at conference championships from the first weekend all the way through the 3rd weekend of May, and then NCAAs is
the same weekend as IRAs is the most important thing, which is that'll be a long episode once we get to it. And a really strange development, quite frankly. It's everything else is running business as usual. Eastern sprints are the usual weekend. They're not coinciding with NIRCs. Everything else the same weekend. What's going to happen there?
Well, the only thought I really have is that the NCAA got pushed back a week, which is pretty nice in terms of collegiate athletes taking finals, because as far as I know, most of my conference and most of several other conferences have finals that same weekend. But I do know the Pac-12 schools have finals the weekend of IRA most of the time.
NIRCs were always on they were on a Friday to accommodate Eastern sprints. So our championship races for the NESCAC and for a few others were always on the last day of finals and the last vestiges, which shouldn't really affect things too much, you would think, from an objective standpoint. But all the stress of finals going into those last 3 days of race prep, and just when you need to be in the best state of mind, but you're distracted, and it just never helped. It wasn't ever good. I don't think I ever had a good race at NIRCs. That's not true. I think I had exactly one, and still lost. So that'll be a really fun weekend to keep track of things, and a lot of subject material to get on. But with the men's teams, it's thankfully just a tiniest bit simpler, since there are just fewer teams to keep track of with
thank God.
just with IRA and it not being an NCAA sport. So we'll probably break that up into binarily, and it'll be D1 teams and mostly teams that get invited to the IRAs in one basket, and then in the other basket, everyone else, which is an unfortunate way of thinking about it. But when you've got all the club teams and the D3 teams that have varsity status but don't often get invited to the big boy pool in the IRAs, it's hard to keep them in the same conversation. So we'll keep those in check like that. And of course, also within the IRA basket, we'll think about lightweights and heavyweights. And thankfully, the easiest thing to keep track of will be the women's lightweight teams, since there are just so few of them.
There are 7.
Well, 9.
Potentially 8.
Potentially 9.
It is not 9.
What about Bucknell? They've put together
The
a
last
squad in
time
the past.
Bucknell put out a lightweight squad was like 2012.
That still counts in my book.
Well,
the fact remains that they could do it, just because there are certainly
several teams that can field lightweight 4s, but it is very unlikely that they will, because most of them are lower level Division 1 or Division 3 schools.
We'll call it 9 for now, and just be and keep track of that as the season progresses. But that's it'll be a fun season to keep track of. And but for now, there's nothing to talk about there, because it's still the winter, and everywhere is actually not everywhere is still snowed in. The Charles is nice and wide and open, as we were talking about on our way over to record this today. Riverside got to put out an 8 and put oars in the water for the first time since essentially the Charles for me. I haven't rowed in a good couple of months, and that getting out yesterday is going to keep you going for a while. But tell us your experience. How did you find yesterday's water?
Right. So yesterday morning we woke up to practice, and our coach addressed us, and she said we should be emotionally prepared to watch the men come into the boathouse and go on the water as we erged again. An hour and a half, as we've done for the last 2 weeks, because there has been water earlier in the last 2 weeks too, and we just keep erging. Lots of volume, lots of fitness, but no water time here. Ice
in the basin, but not upstream on the Charles, which is both surprising and not surprising for Boston. It's global warming at its finest. So I'm, as a California native, I'm not complaining. I'm ready to get back in the water. I think winter is overrated and shouldn't exist. It should be abolished, but that's just me. So we can work on that later, but it's I mean, we're working on it now, but for now, it's just more thoughts about winter training, and just lots of time on the ergs. And that's actually where the name of this podcast came from, just Down on the Watt Farm. It's just two people who are still farming watts, still on the ergs, and still getting fitness the old fashioned way, just talking about what it means to still be going after it. How long? I mean, I've been doing this for now 9 years almost. So
welcome to my decade.
Wow.
That's
it. So just seen a lot of meters. Seen a lot of meters tick by on those Concept 2. Well, not even just Concept 2 screens anymore, but mostly Concept 2 screens. So this podcast will just be more thoughts about training and what it means to still be going. So I've seen now 2 different teams and on my 3rd. So it's still going. I can't believe I'm still getting after it, but I mean, what about you? Are you still thinking about like post-college rowing, or not even thinking about?
Right. So what am I doing? Every day I get on an erg and I think about the process of getting off of an erg and not erging after college. And unlike Andrew, I'm really into winter training. So I expect to erg for a pretty long period of my life. Looking forward to masters rowing once I graduate. Pretty excited. I do like erging.
Let me clarify. I like dynamic erging. That's not to say I like the dynamic ergs themselves. I like erging on sliders. That's a good system. It's a good way of locking in the system of rowing, the system of actually rowing on the water, because you're not just gathering up in a very static way and then releasing just in whatever way you feel like, because that trains some very bad habits. And yet there we are, and everyone on the national team is just ripping a 2K on a static erg. So if they can do it, so can I. That's what I've been telling myself now with all this testing that they've been doing and that I've been doing recently. So
yeah, I think it's a really good point with the national teams setting the standard with the static erg, because they're on the static erg. That's the same reason we use the static erg, is like we have access to RP3s, we have slides, and certainly our lightweights are known for doing slides. But we stick to the static for probably 90% of the volume we do in the rowing motion, just because that is the gold standard. And I don't think anything's really going to change anytime soon.
Why does it have to be the gold standard, though? Because I said it, and I hope you agree, that the movements that are taught on RP3s and on sliders they're better, right? They're better mechanics for translating from land workouts to water workouts.
Right, so I certainly don't disagree, but with the national team, you know, in the collegiate level, if you're trying to make the U23 team, if you're trying to go to that higher level, you know, you're looking at teams like Cal, you're looking at teams like Stanford, they're on static ergs too. They're not just RP3ing all the time. And maybe it's different for men, but with women, if you want to make a team, your score has to be static for it to count.
No, it's the same for men. And it's something that gave me a lot of pain and heartache while I was trying without a reward to be recruited by some schools which shall remain nameless to save myself the embarrassment. We can get into that later, but it's just, it doesn't seem right to me that it's more of a test of strength and pain endurance, which I truly think you can get an equitable experience on sliders and on RP3s. That's something that that does come. Just because it's easier, quote unquote, with I understand that it is easier. I'm not denying that it's easier, but it's true to the actual rowing motion and the actual events that we're all really training for. That is to say, 2Ks on the water in the spring.
Do ergs float, Andrew?
We're going to get into this so much more later, but yes, I'm not denying the flotation qualities of ergs. If you want to be successful at any level, it's, I mean, what's that line from Zeno Mueller? The ergs are the SATs of collegiate rowing.
Yes, they are.
So I'm not here to deny that. I'm not here to get in the way of the institutional thinking behind ergs. But I am here to question everything and say, does it really have to be this way? Does it always have to come down to static erging, which is from the beginning, when it started out, I think it was a great way. It was a great innovation. I think Concept 2 had the right idea for being able to mimic the rowing motion outside of being on the water. But now with the technological advancements we've made, feels like the sport should change with it. Everyone's really rooted in their tendencies, and I wish they weren't.
Yeah, I really don't think we're going to see anything change seriously, at least in the collegiate scene, in terms of erging on a static versus a dynamic setting until coaches make that decision to change. And that's going to come from a higher level in terms of national team coaches, in terms of top leaders in the circuits, whether we do a static or dynamic erg. Do
any of your coaches have thoughts about the difference beyond the static erg being the gold standard for the US national team?
Well, most of the work we do is on a static erg because it is the gold standard, and that's just kind of how it's been carried down from different programs, because our coaches all come from different places. But we do spend a lot of time on the RP3. We're probably on it twice a week, but in terms of just like slides, like we don't touch them. Just
shout out to Tufts, and I love you, Nolan. I love you, George, for enforcing sliders as much as you did. It, I think, helped. I can't speak as to how much it helped, because we lost more races than we won, but I think it improved the quality of rowing and the level of fitness that we had, more so than static erging did. And that's all we do. That's all they still do at Tufts. So shout out to all the jumbos who are still on the Watt farm there in Medford. But it was good. I liked it, and it reinforced the necessity of indoor training. I don't mind the indoor training as much as I did when I first moved out here from California, because indoor training is not really a thing where in the places where the water doesn't melt or doesn't freeze. But it was a tough initial transition, but the Northeast has brought me around just a little bit to the qualities and the benefits of doing the indoor stuff.
Yeah, I think the only thing of note, if you're looking at lightweight teams versus open weight teams, there's a lot of lightweight. So Wisco, BU, they're both pretty known for doing the dynamic motion. And I think that speaks to kind of the difference between lightweight rowing and open weight rowing in the US, is that lightweights are notably more technical. And I think that's why open weights are able to spend so much more time on a static erg. Is when we get out on the water, it's a lot more about fitness versus, are we rowing every single inch of the stroke absolutely perfectly?
Well, that change still was affected quite, I don't want to say thoroughly, but a lot of teams, at least on the men's side, started rowing like lightweights. It used to be the IRA finals used to be hang and bang 30 strokes a minute and see who can outmuscle the other one. But as recently as I want to say 2012, or as far back as 2012, since we're getting to 2019 at this point, teams started getting to the point where they were rowing 36, 40 strokes a minute off the line, and just entirely changed the game. It's not just who's the strongest, who's the fittest anymore. Heavyweights are starting to row like lightweights. And even at the top level, you've got Robbie Manson, 36 all the way down the course. That's going to be the new norm. That has to be the new norm. There's no other way. If there's another way, please, by all means, let me know, because that's what I've got going for me right now in my rowing, is the ability to turn it over at high rate, which has found me some success, but other parts have let me down. So I do think that there's a change is going to come with regard to the type of motion that is ground into rowers over the course of a winter. And here's the bold prediction: 10 years from now, it's all going to be all dynamic. It should be and will be, I think.
That would be nice.
Wouldn't that just be the greatest?
Wow.
So I think that's it for this week. But join us next time when we actually talk about the World Indoor Championships, when we recap the events and get a chance to look at the times. We'll go into, I think, a little bit more of the winter training stuff, and I think more specifics about what breaks down each team from the other, and get into more of the collegiate preview then. So Down on the Watt Farm is part of the RowingChat network. You can get email notifications of upcoming shows by joining our mailing list via the address in the description, and listen to the many other shows in the network wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Andrew.
I'm Skate.
And we'll see you next week.